If you're American and you think that Canada's recent election, where Mark Carney was elected as their new prime minister, has very little or nothing to do with you or America, you're completely wrong. Yesterday, President Donald Trump met new Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada in the Oval Office, and they had a discussion that wound up being very revealing for what both countries' futures will likely be. And I'm going to cover all of that right here on American Advocates. Canada held elections last Monday to elect a new prime minister after they became fed up with the massive failings of their recent prime minister, Justin Trudeau. All throughout last year, it looked like it was a shoo-in for their conservative candidate, Pierre Poilievre, to win the election and become Canada's new prime minister. However, in a cruel twist of fate, this Mark Carney guy that wound up replacing Justin Trudeau came just in time with the right kind of message that appealed to a certain demographic up in Canada. You see, President Donald Trump has been calling Trudeau Governor Trudeau for the longest time now, and that doesn't sit well with Canadians. To make matters worse, this talk of the 51st state really doesn't sit well with Canadians, and what Mark Carney did with the Liberal Canadian Party was nothing short of brilliant, pointing to how his conservative candidate rival had mannerisms and speech similar to President Donald Trump with a similar message, and then going as far as to accuse Pierre Poilievre of being in bed with President Donald Trump and being in his back pocket. This outraged a certain demographic of Canadians, mainly the boomer generation. You see, the boomers don't really care about rising housing costs. While Gen Z and millennials up in Canada can barely afford to own a home, which sounds eerily similar to the situation down here in America, boomers don't mind that at all. They already own a home, so they're actually literally watching their house value go up. On top of that, boomers are at the retirement age now, so they're retired and they just want to live out the rest of their lives in peace. And as a result of this, the economic struggles that Gen Z and millennials are feeling decimated by doesn't affect boomers the same way. So instead, boomers have the luxury of developing Trump derangement syndrome. Yes, Trump derangement syndrome has spread even to the furthest northern reaches of Canada. All this talk of the 51st state has made that generation hate Trump. And so rather than thinking about the future of Canada for the future generations, their children and grandchildren, the boomers showed up in mass to vote in the candidate that they felt was going to stand up to President Donald Trump and make him stop referring to Canada as the 51st state. It is being called the largest comeback in modern democracy history. Mark Carney was voted in, largely because of boomers, as the new Prime Minister of Canada. And after the election, this was part of the speech that he delivered when it came to President Donald Trump.
President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen. When I sit down with President Trump, it will be to discuss the future economic and security relationship between two sovereign nations.
Now, the Canadian copium that is centered around the new Prime Minister Mark Carney up there is very real. They think they voted in a candidate who is going to be anti-Trump and who's going to put Trump back in his place and make Canada the greatest nation in the world somehow. Unfortunately for them, that is not reality at all. Mark Carney is Justin Trudeau 2.0. He was one of Trudeau's leading advisors, and to make matters worse, he's more extreme than Justin Trudeau. And I'll cover that in this video a little bit later, but for now, what's important to point out is Mark Carney is the guy that President Donald Trump wanted elected as Prime Minister. He's even on record saying it right here.
The party is going to win now in the next election, most likely. And they were down and out. Isn't that going to make them more hostile to us and possibly
I'd rather deal with a liberal than a
for China, closer to Canada, and that would really put us in a bind.
The conservative that's running is stupidly no friend of mine. I don't know him, but he said negative things. So when he says negative things, I couldn't care less. I think it's easier to deal, actually, with a liberal.
And so yesterday, the two of them met in the Oval Office, and the questions that came were hard-hitting. First and foremost, the obvious question, is Canada going to become the 51st state? Take a look at how Trump answers it.
Mr. President, you have said that Canada should become the 51st state. Were you joking?
No. Well, I still believe that, but you know, takes two to tango, right? But no, I do. I mean, I believe it would be a massive tax cut for the Canadian citizens. You get free military, you get tremendous medical cares and other things. There would be a lot of advantages, but it would be a massive tax cut.
Now, of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney does go out of his way to say there are some places that are never for sale, and Canada is one of them. He says that here.
Well, if I may, As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together. And we have done that in the past. And part of that, as the President just said, is with respect to our own security.
But as he's saying that, I want you to notice something. Notice the difference in body language between the two of these leaders. I am no body language psychologist or expert, but it should be very clear to most people who's in charge here and who has all the cards, or most of the cards, as Trump likes to say. Another question that wound up coming in during this meeting I also found to be fascinating. It was a good question, and it was a question basically being asked to President Trump on what he would do if Canada decided to stop playing ball in America and to stop supporting us with trade as much and to start looking for new trading partners. Take a listen at how he answered it.
How do you react if Canada decided not to shop in the American store as much as before and decided to partner with other countries?
Well, we don't do much business with Canada from our standpoint. They do a lot of business with us. We're at like 4%, and usually those things don't last very long. We have great things, great product. The kind of product we sell, nobody else can sell, including military. Look, we make the best military equipment in the world, and Canada buys our military equipment, which we appreciate, but we make the best military equipment in the world by far.
And you gotta love it. Right in front of Canada's new prime minister, essentially he's saying, well, they can't do that. They literally can't. Canada will always be a customer of America. Not only did President Donald Trump, though, go out of his way to remind them that Canada will always be our customer, even if they start looking for other trade partners and other ways to purchase things that they need. And not only did he say right in front of the Prime Minister that he thinks it's still a great idea for Canada to be the 51st state, but one of the things that's most important to emphasize here is Mark Carney's policy and why President Donald Trump wanted him to win. Like I said earlier in this video, Mark Carney is Trudeau 2.0. And when it comes to Mark Carney, he's more extreme, especially when it comes to oil and gas. Take a look at this article from Canada. The big question now, with anti-oil and gas Mark Carney as Prime Minister, will Canada continue to squander the greatest oil opportunity on Earth? And what I gotta say to that is, this is one of the leading reasons that I have not heard anyone explain yet on why President Donald Trump wanted Mark Carney to win over Pierre Poilievre. But this is the reality of it. On election night, this is immediately where my mind went to. I thought, this is why he wants Mark Carney to win. And the reason has to deal with the fact that this is a savage world, but we will effectively be able to take advantage of Canada more under Liberal leadership than we would under Pierre Poilievre. This article specifically goes on to say, Justin Trudeau took Canadian anti-oil policy to a new level, making the destruction of Canada's oil opportunity a central focus. We need to phase oil out, he said back in 2017. We need to manage the transition off of our dependence on fossil fuels. While Trudeau's opposition to Canadian oil and therefore its economy is well known, most Canadians do not know Mark Carney is a far more committed opponent of Canadian oil than Justin Trudeau ever was. Indeed, Carney is one of the world's leading net zero advocates. The last several decades of Mark Carney's career have been focused on pressuring countries like Canada to adopt net zero policies that have proved ruinous. And this is the reality of business that President Trump understands. With someone like Mark Carney in office now, who's not going to want to mine resources and dig for oil, Canada's customers who rely on Canada for these resources like oil are now going to have an issue as Canada will start to refuse to drill for the oil as much under Mark Carney. They will in turn need to look elsewhere for these resources. And who's the world leader currently that campaigned all last year on drill baby drill? That's right. President Donald Trump did. What we are seeing is a business shark in action. Someone like President Donald Trump stating that he'd rather deal with a liberal leader is for a twofold reason, and this is one of those reasons. With a liberal in office like Mark Carney up in Canada who will be making stupid economic and resource decisions, America is now primed to take advantage of those decisions and to profit off of them. We will fill the void that Canada cannot for their own customers and ultimately wind up replacing them. Now, one of the other reasons President Donald Trump would want someone in office like Mark Carney is because of the possible threat of provinces in Canada like Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia wanting to secede from Canada and join America. Alberta specifically is very appealing. It's compared to Texas It is often called the Texas of Canada. Widely conservative, plenty of young people move there as a result, because Canadian demographics show that Gen Z and millennials are far more conservative, and they're sick and tired of living in a liberal country. So Alberta is full of youth, conservative ideals, and very rich in oil and resources. A referendum is already in place from Alberta because they are sick of being screwed over in Canada. Alberta is a very wealthy province that helps keep Canada afloat from an economic standpoint, yet they keep getting continually screwed over by very liberal areas of Canada like Quebec. So now there's a referendum for Alberta to secede from Canada. Is it likely to happen? I don't think so, but it's out there. And if somehow Alberta pulls it off, all it would take for this to happen would be for President Donald Trump to look at it and go, I recognize this, and something needs to happen. So it's not entirely impossible for Alberta to wind up becoming the 51st state, or at the very least, a U.S. territory. And a prime minister like Mark Carney in office might drive Alberta further into the hands of America rather than Canada. And finally, the reason why Trump would rather deal with a liberal than a conservative is because when it comes to foreign policy and protecting the economic interest of a country, conservatives usually have more of a backbone than liberals do. When you look at the body language and mannerisms of a prime minister like Mark Carney in the Oval Office when President Donald Trump is answering questions, you can see that. Trump is going to stampede all over this guy and give him the Trudeau treatment. He may not call him governor, and he may stop referring to Canada as the 51st state at his request, but when it comes to private business matters, negotiations, and dealings, President Donald Trump is going to consistently have the upper hand. He's not afraid to flex the power and might of America in Mark Carney's face, and Mark Carney, being a globalist who seeks to appease all other countries and preserve simply the image of how Canada comes across to the rest of the world, is going to likely back down 7, 8, 9 times out of 10. To President Donald Trump. And you can see that in one of the final questions answered right here by President Donald Trump when it comes to, is there anything Mark Carney can do to talk Trump out of tariffing Canada?
Is there anything he could say to you in the course of your meetings with him today that would get you to lift tariffs on Canada?
No.
Why not?
Just the way it is. We want to make our own cars. We don't really want cars from Canada. And we put tariffs on cars from Canada, and at a certain point, it won't make economic sense for Canada to build those cars. And we don't want steel from Canada because we're making our own steel, and we're having massive steel plants being built right now as we speak. We really don't want Canadian steel, and we don't want Canadian aluminum and various other things because we want to be able to do it ourselves. And we, because of, past thinking of people, we have a tremendous deficit with Canada. In other words, they have a surplus with us. And there's no reason for us to be subsidizing Canada. Canada's a place that will have to be able to take care of itself economically. I assume they can. I will tell you that Trudeau, when I spoke to him, I used to call him Governor Trudeau. I think that probably didn't help his election. But when I spoke to him, I said, so why are we taking your cars? Why are we taking we want to make them ourselves. I said, and if the price of your cars went up, or if we put a tariff on your cars of 25%, what would that mean to you? He said that would mean the end of Canada. He actually said that to me.
So overall, the bad news for Canadians is they basically have Justin Trudeau 2.0 as their new prime minister. The boomers have chosen to sacrifice the young generations at the expense of their Trump derangement syndrome, and Canada's economy is going to continue to crumble. They're going to make mistakes at a catastrophic level, and President Donald Trump is poised to capitalize on all of that. Canada's future remains quite uncertain and looks very bleak, while America continues to capitalize, putting itself first and making the best decisions possible under what will likely be the best president in American history. Glory to America. God bless the USA.
My fellow Americans, get ready for an incredible future because the golden age of America has only just begun. It will be like nothing that has ever been seen before. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.